Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show host or the guest are their own. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's May 22nd, and I'm pretty excited because today and every day this week, the RealTalk MS podcast is coming to you live from the Sheraton Centre Toronto Hotel in Toronto, Canada, where tomorrow the International Progressive MS Alliance kicks off its third scientific congress. The theme of the event is Progressive MS, Making a Difference Through Rehabilitation and Symptom Management, and today we're going to preview some of what the attendees will be seeing and hearing. But before we get to the scientific congress, there are a few other things that you should know about. The U.S. Department of Justice filed suit on behalf of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration against two stem cell clinics for allegedly offering unproven stem cell treatments to their patients. In last week's podcast episode, we talked about a study that showed autologous hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, or HSCT, was effective in treating aggressive MS. And we also talked about the sad fact that there were so-called stem cell clinics that were operating barely within or just outside the boundaries of legal and ethical practice. And these two clinics are examples of the kinds of places that are taking advantage of people who are desperate to find treatment for very serious illnesses. These clinics are not offering HSCT to anyone. In the lawsuits, the U.S. government contends that these stem cell clinics create a substance from a patient's body fat, which is then injected back into the patient as a quote-unquote stem cell treatment that will treat cancer, pulmonary disease, arthritis, stroke, ALS, and multiple sclerosis. Except this entire process hasn't been approved by the FDA. In fact, there's no published proof anywhere that this process works as advertised. So federal prosecutors are requesting that the court issue a permanent injunction preventing these two companies from offering to patients these so-called stem cell treatments that haven't received FDA approval. There's some really important and legitimate stem cell research being done today. Again, just last week, we talked about how that research is producing some really encouraging results, but please keep in mind that unfortunately, there are also unproven and ineffective so-called stem cell treatments out there that are being marketed as something that they're not, offering the promise of results that they won't achieve. And it comes down to each of us choosing to become an informed medical consumer and to know the difference between what's real and what's a fairy tale. The results from a clinical trial in Milan, Italy, demonstrate that over the short term, mindfulness meditation improves well-being for people living with multiple sclerosis, but the benefits don't seem to last. Now, this study involved 139 people with relapsing remitting and secondary progressive MS. The study participants were divided into two groups, and they received either 8 weeks of an online mindfulness meditation course or 8 weeks of an online educational course. The online mindfulness meditation course included music, meditation, home exercise, and discussion on symptom acceptance. The educational course included informational videos on MS and home exercises. After 2 months, the group that received the online mindfulness meditation course reported having a higher quality of life, lower anxiety, less depression, and fewer problems sleeping. Unfortunately, these improvements were not maintained after 6 months. And the researchers indicated that mindfulness meditation demands a commitment of a significant amount of time, and that continued practice might be required in order to sustain the positive effects that were seen after just 2 months. A study published in the journal Clinical Rehabilitation suggests that virtual reality is as effective in treating gait and balance impairments in MS as standard rehabilitation practices. In this study, researchers looked at the results of 11 already completed clinical trials, which provided data on 466 patients who were diagnosed with MS. And the researchers found that when it came to balance, walking speed, mobility, and navigation through obstacles, the patient group that used virtual reality in their rehabilitation achieved about the same outcome as the patient groups who relied on more traditional rehabilitation therapy. And I think this is really important because frequently the most challenging and taxing aspect of rehabilitation therapy is actually getting to your appointment. And I've seen people living with MS just wave the white flag and skip physical therapy appointments because the logistics of getting to those appointments are more than they want to deal with, which means those people miss out on physically doing better. And when we physically do better, we tend to feel better about ourselves and everything else that might be going on in our lives. So if these same patients had the opportunity to skip all the worry about getting to an appointment and could actually do their physical therapy at home using virtual reality or teletherapy or robotics, it instantly becomes more doable. And that means we have people living with MS who are actually living better lives than they otherwise would have. We know, in fact, research has already proven that people with MS benefit from physical exercise. It's also been shown that people living with MS as a group have low rates of physical activity. So from a rehabilitation perspective, it's important to try to understand the barriers to exercise among people living with multiple sclerosis. And a small study at Kent State University looked at this by examining the relationship between someone living with MS who had a history of depression or was experiencing current depression, and their level of aerobic endurance to determine whether depression might actually be one of the barriers to exercise. So a group of 31 people with relapsing remitting MS were given a 2-minute step test, and the researchers used a statistical analysis technique called linear regression to demonstrate that having a history of depression could predict lower aerobic fitness, while having current depression didn't. The researchers concluded that having a history of depression might represent a barrier to exercise among people living with MS, and the researchers went on to highlight the importance of effectively treating depression in this population. In the past, I've referred to depression as the gatekeeper on the road to rehabilitation. 50% of those people living with MS are going to develop clinical depression during the course of their disease, and depression makes every other step forward in managing and living with MS more difficult by a significant order of magnitude. Often, depression is the very thing that keeps someone from attending a rehab appointment or participating in any other treatment that could otherwise improve their quality of life, whether it's physical exercise or some other rehabilitation treatment. Depression is the 600-pound gorilla that stands in the way of achieving an improved state of wellness for large segments of the MS community. So I'm personally hopeful that our neurologists, who often play the role of quarterback on the team of healthcare professionals needed to effectively manage MS, are proactive in screening for depression and/or referring their MS patients to a psychologist who will. A while ago, I told you about the $4 million Mobility Unlimited Challenge that the Toyota Mobility Foundation launched in an effort to spur innovation in creating next-generation mobility devices. The challenge has already identified and provided seed funding for ideas like a gaze-based power wheelchair that lets the user operate independently using just their eyes, all the way to a hoverboard that can accommodate a manual wheelchair. Well, now the Toyota Mobility Foundation is asking people living with lower limb disabilities to share their ideas for what's needed in next-generation mobility devices. Using the hashtag MyMobilityUnlimited on social media, you're invited to share your thoughts to help inspire inventors. Toyota recently commissioned a survey of wheelchair users in the United States, the UK, India, Japan, and Brazil, and found that 89% of wheelchair users experience pain as a result of using their mobility device. 43% have been unable to find an accessible restroom. 23% have been refused access to public transportation. And 30% are frustrated by out-of-date assistive technologies. Given the current state of technology, it's pretty clear that when it comes to developing the next generation of mobility devices, we can do better. So share your thoughts and ideas, use the hashtag MyMobilityUnlimited, and help the experts design the future. And speaking of experts designing the future, that brings us back to the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Congress here in Toronto. This is the third scientific congress that the Progressive MS Alliance has hosted. The first one was held in Milan in 2013 and focused on identifying priority areas of research that would have the most impact in changing the lives of people living with progressive MS. The second scientific congress was held in San Francisco in 2016, and its focus was on addressing research challenges unique to progressive MS, including identifying pathophysiologic mechanisms, developing new tools, and conducting clinical trials in the era of disease-modifying therapies. The event that gets underway tomorrow is designed to advance our understanding of progressive MS by integrating information from multiple disease fields and by focusing on the most promising avenues of future research and interventions when it comes to MS rehabilitation and symptom management. This scientific congress has 4 stated objectives. Number 1 is to understand the perspectives of people living with progressive MS as it relates to well-being through rehabilitation and symptom management. The second objective is to explore the state of the fundamental, translational, and applied science in rehabilitation and symptom management in MS and other neurological conditions. Number 3 is to discuss priorities for key areas of rehabilitation and symptom management research that have sufficient scientific evidence to impact progressive MS. And the fourth objective is to develop strategic considerations for accelerating implementation of research insights into clinical application and real-world setting for people with progressive MS. So, to me, there are a couple of things about these 4 objectives that really stand out. The first thing is that the first objective is to understand the perspectives of people living with progressive MS, and that's been a fundamental guiding principle of the International Progressive MS Alliance from the very beginning. It's why they created 3 seats on the scientific steering committee of this organization specifically for people living with progressive MS. And it's why they never stray from acknowledging the real-world implications of whatever science they might be discussing. And that's really the other aspect of these 4 objectives that stands out to me. The goal of accelerating the implementation of research insights into clinical application. In other words, what has to happen to deliver these next-generation rehabilitation and symptom management solutions to the people who need them most and need them now. And just as a reminder, the International Progressive MS Alliance has a track record for moving the progressive MS research agenda forward. In 2016, they invested over $14 million in funding 3 international networks of researchers and institutions focused on accelerating progress in specific areas of progressive MS research. This scientific congress has attracted over 200 attendees from 16 different countries, and that really underscores the Alliance's approach to worldwide collaboration to find solutions for people living with progressive MS. We'll be hearing presentations from some of the top scientific minds in the world. We'll be meeting new scientific investigators, and we'll be seeing some of the volunteer leaders of the MS movement, all of them coming together here in Toronto to shine a bright spotlight on rehabilitation and symptom management in progressive MS. And you can expect a new RealTalk MS podcast episode every day this week, where we'll review the presentations, we'll meet the experts, and we'll share our thoughts. My name is John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you tomorrow from the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Congress at the Sheraton Centre Hotel in Toronto, Canada. I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's Wednesday, May 23rd, and welcome to a special episode of RealTalk MS. I'm at the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Congress in Toronto, Canada. The theme of the Scientific Congress is Progressive MS, making a difference through rehabilitation and symptom management. Today, more than 200 researchers, clinicians, and people living with progressive MS have come together from 16 different countries to ask questions, share their knowledge, and determine how to best impact the MS rehabilitation and symptom management research agenda. I've already had an opportunity to talk with one of the world's leading MS research scientists, and I also had a chance to meet up with a group of rehabilitation experts, and we're going to get to those conversations in just a moment. One of the first attendees that I ran into was Dr. Douglas Arnold from McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Dr. Arnold is a neurologist with a special expertise in magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI. His research interests have centered on the use of advanced neuroimaging techniques to assess how MS and Alzheimer's disease evolve and to measure the effects of drug therapy on these diseases. Dr. Arnold is the principal investigator in a multi-year, multi-center research study to identify a biomarker for MS progression, and that study is being funded by the International Progressive MS Alliance. In a moment, you'll hear my conversation with Dr. Arnold. I'm speaking with Dr. Douglas Arnold from McGill University in Montreal, Canada, a renowned researcher working on a multi-year research study that's looking to identify a biomarker for MS progression. Dr. Arnold, can you first tell our listeners what a biomarker is and what your research is looking to do?
A biomarker is something that we can use in place of a clinical outcome or a symptom that gives us more power to detect the effect of a drug. In the field of MS, biomarkers and MRI markers in particular have been extremely important by providing an outcome measure based on gadolinium-enhancing lesions and new T2 lesion formation that has allowed the testing of new drugs in relatively small trials that have relatively short duration so that the potential of the drug can be assessed and the dose can be determined before companies have to embark on large phase 3 trials that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Part of the problem with progressive MS drug development has been the absence of such a biomarker. And so in the past, it's been necessary to go straight to these large registration trials that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And even large drug companies have been averse to doing this because of the risk involved, since most of the trials up until recently have not been successful. The collaborative network that I lead is devoted to trying to develop novel MRI markers based on the use of artificial intelligence and deep learning to overcome the shortcomings that have dogged the field so far. We're very hopeful that we'll succeed at this.
So you mentioned the fact that you're leading a collaborative network. This is, I think, about 16 researchers in research centers located in various countries around the world. Where is your team located?
The collaborative network that I lead is funded by the International Progressive MS Alliance, and it involves researchers in a number of countries around the world: Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands. I think that's all.
So talk for just a minute about how having this global effort trying to solve progressive MS changing the game.
The collaborative network that I lead is actually important for achieving the goals that we have, which is to develop a novel MRI marker, because of the expertise that becomes available when you're in a position to actually benefit from expertise not only locally or nationally, but internationally. And so we have put together, I think, a team of highly qualified people from around the world who can contribute to the methodology that we hope to develop.
Dr. Arnold, I know you're in the midst of a multi-year study, so we wish you nothing but success and look forward to talking with you about the outcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I also had an opportunity to meet up with 3 rehabilitation research experts. We talked about the challenges that they and their colleagues face in MS rehabilitation, and we also discussed some of the things that they'd like to see come out of this scientific congress. I'm sitting with Prue Plummer from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Nora Fritz from Wayne State University, and Jake Sosnoff from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. These are 3 rehabilitation research specialists, and I thought we could talk a little bit about how important the whole concept of rehabilitation in MS really is.
I'm a physical therapist, so I think it's very important because we know that medications don't treat the symptoms, and we are only moderately effective with our rehabilitation too. So I'm really focusing on trying to figure out which rehabilitation strategies are going to optimize recovery or improvement of walking in people with MS. But also I've started to look at how we can combine pharmacological intervention with physical therapy to optimize outcomes. And I'm really here because I've become recently interested in whether people with a progressive disease course are responding differently to our rehabilitation programs than people with a relapsing disease course. And I think we need to give a bit more consideration to that in our research design and also our clinical practice. So I'm interested in hearing about the stories of people with progressive MS and their experiences with rehabilitation.
Nora, what sort of things are you hoping to either hear or talk about over the next couple days?
Well, like Prue, I'm really interested in learning about what others are doing differently with a progressive disease course compared to a relapsing disease course. Our lab focuses on both disease courses, and we admit all of those participants to our trials and do analyze them differently. And so I think one of the things I'd really like to know is what sort of rehabilitation is important to persons with progressive MS, and how can we better meet their needs?
Jake, technology is moving at a faster rate than ever before, and it's impacting all sorts of areas of life, including science and including rehabilitation. You hear about being on the cusp of things like robotic rehab, virtual reality rehab. How do you see technology impacting rehabilitation over the next short-term, mid-term, long-term?
So, John, you're perfectly right in that technology is always changing. And I think the thing to focus on with MS is there's an abundant amount of technology right now, but most of it is not necessarily designed for individuals with MS and their unique needs. And then even as you look at that population and you break it down in relapse remitting or progressive, again, those needs are different and technology rarely gets focused there. So I think there's all these great tools, but I think the basic science really, basic rehabilitation science is still necessary. So is, upper limb rehab better with a robot versus manual training? I think that's a worthwhile question, but we're still at the stage where we're trying to understand if rehab itself is beneficial for these different populations.
So I'll ask you the question you just posed. Is rehabilitation helpful to the progressive MS population?
I think if you have to break down progressive, secondary progressive, and primary progressive. In my experience, I've seen gains with rehab in individuals with secondary progressive. I haven't seen as much with people with primary, although it's a very small group of people that I worked with. And I honestly think that's one of the challenges when we're working with the progressive subtype of MS is that the numbers are smaller. So if you ask one clinician or one researcher, I think you get a different answer, right? I think that's really where we need to come from. Look at the pool the data across, and then we have to make sure the researchers were doing the same thing. I think that's another important benefit of Alliance.
I'd like to chime in on that too, if I can. One of the things that I think is really important to consider, in addition to what Jake pointed out about a lot of heterogeneity and small sample sizes, is that the type of rehabilitation or what you're attempting to rehabilitate is really important. So there is some really nice evidence to support exercise to improve symptoms like fatigue or pain or depression in persons with progressive MS, but perhaps if you look at the evidence for, strength training or walking training or other types of training, you may find that it's not quite as strong. So that might be an important delineation to make.
And the point I wanted to make about this conversation is that I think it's important for us to have clinician decision markers of clinical efficacy, but we have to keep in mind about whether the patient feels that they've benefited from the therapy. And I think that someone with a progressive disease course may not think the same about their expectations of rehabilitation as someone with a relapsing disease course. And I think we've largely ignored that so far.
This morning's agenda at the Scientific Congress includes a series of sessions, panel discussions, and presentations that touch on subjects ranging from harnessing the power of robotics in rehabilitation, to using brain stimulation as a means of managing mental health, to understanding what lessons we can learn about neurological rehabilitation from other illnesses and medical conditions. Later this morning, there's a presentation on understanding the perspectives of people living with progressive MS, including a panel discussion with people who are living with progressive MS, so you can be sure that they'll be sharing their own firsthand experiences and opinions. Later in the day, there are presentations on the benefits of exercise in progressive MS, how gray matter atrophy in the brain affects cognition, and cognitive rehabilitation. I'll be talking to the presenters as well as some of our attendees, and you'll be hearing it on tomorrow's episode of RealTalk MS. My name is John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you tomorrow from the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Congress in Toronto, Canada.